I'm Annie Duke. Playing your draws in a multi-way pot can be very profitable, but you have to pay close attention to both your position in the hand and to your opponent's actions. Now, in this lesson, we'll look at some strategies that can help you play both your big draws and your small draws against multiple opponents. The first thing to remember about drawing in multi-way pots is that even your big hands aren't so big again, because against multiple players, remember those extra outs may not actually be good. Now, if you can improve your odds by knocking a couple of opponents out of the pot, you want to do that. Let's say you're holding a hand like ace of spades, king of spades on our same 10 of spades, 6 of spades, deuce of hearts board from earlier, only this time, instead of one player in the pot with you, there are 3 other players in the pot with you. If you're in position on the hand, pay particular attention to the action that happens in front of you. If the first player bets and the next 2 players each call, it's pretty unlikely that either the ace or the king part of this hand is going to win if you hit them. So that's probably going to also hit somebody else's hand. But it's also unlikely that a raise will win you the pot right now because so many people have stuck around in the pot. So you should probably just play your hand like you only have a flush draw, which is probably about what you have, and hope to hit your hand. But now let's look at what happens if we change that action just a little bit. Let's say the first 2 players check the flop, and now the third player bets. Now you have a chance to raise and thin out the field, obviously improving the odds that an ace or a king can win the pot. This play is called making your outs pure or ginning your hand, making it so that when you hit your hand, it is gin, which is obviously a good thing. Now, since the first 2 players checked, there's a good chance that they'll fold to your raise when the action gets back to them, meaning that at worst, you will be up against just one opponent for the rest of the hand, which means you're playing heads up. At best, the original bettor will also fold to your raise, and you can just win the pot right there when you have ace high. You should be looking for spots to gin your outs whenever possible. For example, here's another one. Say the first player checks and the second player bets, and now the third player folds. If you raise here, there's certainly a better than average chance that that first player who checked will fold, and you'll be at minimum heads up against that one bettor with your big hand, or maybe he just folds and you win right there. Now, when you have a small draw, it's very different. There's really no need to raise to make your outs pure because, frankly, you just don't have any outs to make pure. You have no extra outs over the flush card to try to gin. Instead, you should look to play the hand slow and cheap in order to try to hit your flush. That means when players in front of you bet, you should just be calling and taking that nice price that they're offering you. If you're holding our example hand from earlier, that 6 of spades, 7 of spades, on a board of king of spades, 8 of spades, deuce of hearts, you should really pay close attention to spots where you may be overcalling against more than one opponent in the pot, because that may indicate that at least one other player also has a flush draw. And obviously, when you have a 7 high, that's going to be bad for you. I mean, think about it. There are 2 flush cards on the board. One player bets and 2 others call. What could they possibly have? Okay, here's the problem. I mean, if you're in a multi-way pot, you've got that 7 high flush draw, 7 high spade draw. If you can see those spades on the board, don't you think everybody else can? So when you get multiple people coming into those pots, it just is very often the case that somebody else is going for that same texture. Now, certainly this doesn't mean that you should just go around folding your hand just because there's more than one player in the pot, but it does mean that you need to be very cautious and pay close attention to the action from the other players, particularly if you do hit your flush on the turn. What's more, you should be very careful about calling raises in multi-way pots with a small draw. If you call a raise on a flop when you have something like 6-7 suited, you're probably only going to get to see the turn card, because if the flush doesn't come, one of these other players in the hand is almost certainly going to bet and force you to fold. This means that you're going to be a 4-1 underdog to hit the hand if you're facing a raise, and you're probably only going to get, at best, 2-1 to call. I mean, unless there's multiple players calling that raise, and that's bad for you, because when multiple players call a raise where everybody can see that those 2 flush cards on the board, it's very often that at least one of those people calling a raise is going for a flush, and look at you, now you're calling a raise, drawing dead. Certainly, that's a money-losing play. especially in these spots where it's likely that at least one other player is also on the flush draw. So folding to a raise in this spot actually makes a lot of sense in a multi-way pot. Now, if you're in position with either a big draw, or at least what you think is a big draw, or a small draw, and the action checks to you, you can just make a standard, small stab at the pot, say 60% of the pot. This play is likely to work whether or not you were raised before the flop. But if you're out of position with a hand like ace, king of spades, you can play the hand really almost the same as if you were heads up. Think about it. When you're first to act, you can check into multiple opponents. And this is a really great play because it gives you the option to make a big check raise when the action gets back to you if you feel like you can knock everybody out and have a really good chance of just winning the pot right there, or at most being against just one opponent. For example, let's say the action checks to the button. Who bets? Look, if you check raise with your big draw against the button, you're probably going to knock the other two players out who are to your left, since you just made a very strong play by trying to check raise the entire field. But if you check and now the second player bets and the other two players fold, look, you can check raise here as well. You know you're going to be heads up. You may actually be able to win it right here. And whatever happens, you're probably going to get to see two cards. Now, if you check and the second player checks, and the third player bets, and the fourth player folds, obviously, now you can check raise again since you're very likely to get heads up. See the theme here? Whenever you think that check raise is going to get you heads up or win the pot right there, you should definitely be going for that check raise. You're getting fold equity, and you're going to get to gin your ace and kings out. Now, if you don't think you can narrow down the field, like when the second player bets and the next two player calls, now you should just check and call and hope to hit your hand and play it just like it's a flush draw. Now, that's with big hands. What if you're out of position with a small draw? Well, don't go around trying to check raise people, because remember, we don't really want to get that much money in the pot with a small draw. You should instead be betting out to either just try to pick up the pot. That's if you were the pre-flop raiser. Or you can be checking to try to get the cheapest possible look at the turn card when you weren't the pre-flop raiser. Now, if you don't think that betting into the field is ever going to win you the pot, even if you are the pre-flop raiser, you can certainly check and again try to get the cheapest look at that flush draw. Now, if you can get everybody to check behind you, that's great. Otherwise, you should be willing to check and call if someone behind you bets, assuming that nobody raises that bet. If there is a bet and a raise behind you, folding your small draw is most likely always going to be your best play since you're unlikely to be getting the right price to hit your hand.